So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with RokoM and Michele. And this week, we're going to do the power of listening. And I'm going to kick us off with a quote. And the genesis from this quote was actually from the classroom that Roko and I, Margie Hagney was our guest last week on the power of questions. And so this is one that Margie would say in the classroom as well. And it's getting ready to speak is not the same thing as listening. And so when I think about this, it takes me back to what are we listening to? So the power of listening is listening to what's being said and what's not being said, that you're actually truly engaged on the person that's speaking. What the quote's referring to is we may listen at the point that we go, I know how to fix your problem. And then all of a sudden we start listening here because we got the information we needed, and now we're listening to stuff in our heads. So there is power in that. And I'll stop there and go to you, Roko, and say, what are your thoughts?
Oh man, I have so many, so many. So let me just start with, when you said, who are you listening for? That totally resonated with me as we talk about listening. The listening, the active listening where the power comes from is when you're listening for the other person, trying to learn what they know about whatever it is that you are talking about or engaging them on, as opposed to when you were talking about getting ready to speak isn't the same thing as listening. That's when you're listening for yourself and you're reconfirming everything that you know and getting ready to verbally assault someone with all that knowledge in the form of, questions or comments or, whatever. And you mentioned, again, Margie Hagney, this was part of what she mentored us on. And I remember going through it, getting the hand so many times from Margie, because I just had all these questions locked and loaded and ready to go. And it wasn't until we, really learned what it meant to actively listen with curiosity about the other person and their perspectives that all of a sudden those locked and loaded questions and comments went away. And I stopped worrying about telling people what I know and really being curious about what others know.
It's hard to do. I think one of the things, I was with a group of leaders today, and I think one of the recommendations I gave them and I give to people and I do for myself is we get anxious, right? Or stressed when we're practicing to be a better listener, that, and it's in preparation a lot of times so we can ask a question, right? And like Margie said, a well-intentioned question, not the perfect.
Well-considered.
Oh, thank you. Well considered. Thank you for that. But I think what happens in that moment is we get a little nervous, like stage fright or whatever it may be. And so it's like, okay, I have to remember this. I have to remember this thing. And then all of a sudden we're listening to ourselves and what's going on, and we stop listening to what the other person's saying or not saying. And if we're in our heads, we're not observing what else is going on, right? Because you're listening for a lot of different things. So I think the easiest thing for me is I'll just write a note. I'll just write one word down if it's something that I think, okay, I don't want to forget that, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And then I can re-engage with what's going on. But cut yourself some slack on being a better listener, and don't beat yourself up so much over, here I go again. It takes practice. I mean, a lot of practice, but there's a lot of value in it when because you'll start hearing the nuances of stuff that you never heard before, but just trust yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And, for those who are, thinking about changing the way they listen and really harnessing that active listening, one of the things that we learned too in a program that we did was really listening to your senses. So when you're present and in the moment with that other person or that group of people, to your point, what are they not saying? What is their body language saying? What is their tone of voice like? What are you hearing? Are people talking, as other people, multiple conversations happening at one time? So what is it that you're seeing with all your senses? As you're listening to what somebody is saying.
What came to mind for me when you were just talking about that is the expansion of the definition of listening, and maybe the person that you're listening to. And what came to mind for me, because it brought to mind emotional intelligence, right? And so if you're listening for the other person and the energy and what's really going on and the congruence maybe between what their words are and what their actions or what they're projecting. But the other part of it too is listening to ourselves and our bodies and what's happening inside, intuition or gut feeling or whatever. So I think the power in listening, it's multifaceted when you think about that, because it can be, that you're focused on somebody else who's talking to you, but it also could be if you're in a situation that is less than ideal for you, pay attention to what your body's telling you too, and listen to that. And so what do I need to get myself under control, or do I need to release something so I'm not emotionally charged as I'm going to step in and have a conversation? So that's what came to mind for me, is it's more than just one dimensional, and a focus on different aspects of things.
Yeah. And I'll add a little twist as well to take us into a little bit different direction now around listening. And that is repeating what you've heard or what you didn't hear, right? So if we're having a conversation, oftentimes words are broadly used. We might think we're saying the same things, but we're really not, because we have definitions of those words. It happened to me today at work. Someone, I had been using the word baseline, and someone had interpreted my definition of baseline differently. But we were thinking we're on the same page when we actually weren't. And then finally, a clarifying question came up, what do you mean by baseline? And then it was clarified. But so sometimes repeating what you've heard. So I heard you say X, Y, and Z, and then asking the question, is that correct? Or did I hear that right? Something to at least get the acknowledgement that you were either on the right track or not, can also help with listening, with that intent of learning, right? Because again, we can have our biases might kick in, as you mentioned before, or we're just talking to ourselves, and we might be picking up on things that really aren't there. We've changed the language as we've translated it, and now it has a different meaning than what the other person might have.
That's a huge call out when there's an assumption of shared meaning. And it can be the simplest things, right? Because the term baseline, if you're, in the improvement business or whatever, people may go, oh yeah, we all have the same definition for that. Do we? And so I think that's one aspect of listening. The other thing that came up for me is, it's more than just hearing or reading the room or anything else, but it's around understanding the impact of how things are landing as well. So you may be delivering something, and it may not just be this thing of, I'm listening to someone else speaking, and so I'm going to be present and I'm engaged in hearing what's going on. But if you're a leader and you're delivering a message, are you listening and in tune to how it's landing with people, right? And so listening for those cues that may happen, and it could be sighs or eye rolling. So basically some form of observation, but are you paying attention to what's happening in the room? There's another quote that I came across, and so I'll just share it now, is that, and this is Dalai Lama, and it was one that I pulled into a leadership thing, but it's when you talk, you're only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new. And so I think that's the other part of encouraging people, because when I think about listening, I think about the activities that we have together, the listening activities and practice that we have. And so if we can go to this space and not assume shared meaning or that we all know the same thing because we're in this business, right? Whatever it may be. And go into it listening for I'm going to come from a place of curiosity, and I'm going to just listen for the knowledge and not assume that we all know the same stuff. And it's powerful, because you and I have been in the room for how many years together going through stuff, and I still go, oh my God, I didn't know that. And so I think that's the other powerful step too, is not assume shared meaning, and not assume that because there's a topic that you are in the room with someone that has no new information on that topic.
Yeah.
So sit back and breathe a minute and think, okay, let me hear it. Let me hear what else that I can learn today.
Yeah. I love that. I love that last part of the quote of coming from a place of learning something new, as opposed to just sharing what you already know or confirming what you already know. Yeah.
So, and I'm thinking back to the activity, the exercise that we do. So some of the tips, right? If you're in that position, if someone is talking to you, you can listen and like nod your head like you're doing, or acknowledge whatever, but be very aware of not hijacking the conversation, right? If you're truly in the space of wanting to listen to somebody, practice it. Try it for a minute or two, and don't let anybody know what you're doing, right? But truly just listen from that space, and then have an awareness of how often you feel like you want to step in when they're really not done, right? Sharing whatever it is they're sharing, and then sit back and wonder, what question do I have about what I just heard?
Yeah. Yeah. When you were saying, and then just sit back and hold back, what it was bringing back, counting to 10, right?
Yes.
And having that intentional pause, because sometimes we think people are done talking or sharing, and they're really not. They really do have more to say. And so if you just give them that gentle pause, and just let them keep going, and you'll know when they finish, but not jumping right in.
That's so funny, because I think it's the mindset difference, right? Or the intention, because what came to mind for me when you said that is, give them space to breathe and finish, versus when they take a breath, man, I'm jumping in.
You're ready, locked and loaded, all ready to go.
I'm ready. They're breathing. Okay, I'm going to go in and do it. So it's funny. There's tips and tricks, practice, just little practice. So the power of listening, play with it. So Roko, what's on your mind, or what's one or two things you want people to walk away with, just a little bit more on this particular subject?
I think two things. I'd want to leave people with two things. Listen with your senses. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you noticing about the body language, kind of things. So listen with your senses. Don't just listen with your ears, listen with your other senses.
Okay.
And then repeat what you heard, so that to make sure that you weren't listening to yourself with your own biases, but you were actually listening to learn their perspective.
Yeah. So the thing I'll add on that, just as a clarification, don't repeat verbatim what you heard. Okay. Don't literally repeat what you heard, because that's parroting someone, but summarize it. Yeah. Yes. Summarize for understanding. I think for me is practice. Just test out, just do a pilot run of how you're doing. I mean, we do it in activities and practice sessions that we have, that it's intentional, right? We have rules. People go together, speaker's going to talk for a couple minutes, then the listener's going to listen, not interrupt, and then summarize what they heard, and then the listener, how well they did it. But you can practice it on your own, right? You don't have to be in a breakout session or some classroom to do it, but practice listening and just see how you do and where you are with your ability to do that. And then summarize back, but just have an awareness of how you are and where you are with your practice and the power of listening. So that's what I got. So I appreciate that, especially since last week with Margie and the power of questions, but we figured, it's part of coaching, and we continue to practice that. I mean, we interrupt each other plenty of times, that clearly we have opportunity. So we figured we'd share it with you too. So this has been Leadership Soundbites with RokoM and Michele, and please like, share, subscribe. Give us your ideas. We've got a flip chart and Post-it notes with tons of our own, but if you have a topic that you want to unpack, we would love to hear about it. So until next time, thank you.